once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman Character Discussions. I am Sid Part2, joining me today is...
A geek for fun.
Indeed. Today we're here to discuss a character who I don't know a ton about. I don't know if you do either, Alfie, so this should be an interesting one. We're going to talk about Brainiac 5, who is the future version, of Brainiac, who's a member of the Legion of Superheroes. So, what's your background on the character of Brainiac 5?
So, I think, like many in our general age range, which covers a decent amount of things, but it's most people who's on Twitter and like on our circles tend to be between our two ages, is the Legion of Superheroes TV show.
Mm-hmm.
That is my first exposure to him, and that's my largest exposure to him. As a Superman fan and as the champion of the oppressed, I've probably upset quite many people. But despite knowing Superman's long, sordid history with the Legion, I've never actually been interested to check out that many of their own stories, or even stories featuring Superman with them. They're always been kind of part of a fun, nice thing to have in his lore and the lore of the DC universe, but it's not something I'm particularly invested in to go and seek out over other things. So, despite knowing from the show, I can't really speak much about his comic counterpart, aside from what's just been thrown bits and pieces here from a couple of Silver Age comics.
Yeah, I think I'm very much the same way. Like, it's kind of a cool idea that Superman gets to have all these adventures as Superman before he's Superman, you know? I think that's like a fun, neat idea to play with. And like the Legion's got, you know, kind of a wacky cast of characters. I guess I don't know enough about the history of the book, but I wonder if the Superman connection was entirely just there to sell the premise, and then they just kind of like, all right, now let's ignore Superman and just focus on the rest of the Legion. And they maybe did that move a little too early.
I mean, I think a lot of books around that time when like that was really when Superman was at that point, it's the equivalent of when DC makes like Batman and the Outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
Is Superman was the Batman figure, and he was the guy that made merchandise and movies, the guy that sold copies. So you get Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, Superman's best friend Jimmy Olsen, 4 different Superman books individually, and then you got Legion, and I think who would appear in Action Comics for a bit and then get their own book. That's mainly, I feel like, the idea you're getting at there, where it's a concept that probably a writer had for Superman, and then decided to, well, them playing with Superman all the times, you don't want to do it, you can get sick of it, so I imagine having those other characters and Superman just being the supporting cast member made writing so many of those books featuring Superman a lot easier. You don't just have to write the same character over and over again. Moving too early, I'm not sure, because I think the premise itself is just the future of the DC universe. The book should sell itself, really, especially nowadays where people kind of care about that kind of, what that means a little bit more in terms of maybe not being so hopeful, because it is such a hopeful, glistening future, and despite what so many post-apocalyptic futures are in fiction, having such a this things turn out all right is a very DC idea, and one I think a lot of writers could do good with, and it seems to be very popular among the current generation of writers at DC, heralded by its big resurrection under Bendis and Johns. So I feel like there's definitely a concept there that I don't think has held it back. I think maybe it's just been it's kind of daunting just how many characters there are and how much implied lore there is. It kind of has like that X-Men thing.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was about to say. Is like it's DC's X-Men in a way then, because you've just got so much going on that's like so separated out from everything else that, you know, like as much as we like to complain about event books, I have been on the end where I end up reading an event tie-in, and it actually kind of gets me into that book a little bit. Doesn't happen often, but it's happened in the past. And so I wonder if like that kind of, the fact that the Legion is so separated creates that kind of distinction where they have a hard time just tying in or having much of anything to do with mainline continuity. And so maybe that's like the thing that creates some alienation. So all that being said, Brainiac 5 himself is just one of those ideas that I think is just incredibly interesting, because Brainiac's one of Superman's, you know, biggest villains, and to have, you know, the descendant of, or I guess depending on how you interpret Brainiac 5, having Brainiac become Superman's biggest fan is just a really interesting idea.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those things that go to the heart of the character, which is all about the a person can always find a way to have hope or make a last-ditch effort, even in the stories which are most critical of Krypton. The hope at the end of that is, well, Jor-El and Lara weren't like the others, and they found a way to keep something alive despite the flaws of everyone else. It's kind of that there can always be a chance to do good. So the ideas of any Superman villain eventually finding their way back to the light is instantly core to the character's idea. He should always be trying to redeem his enemies in the same way that Wonder Woman is, except I think it maybe works a little better when he fails than she succeeds, just because of how their different perspectives are. I think it makes for more interesting drama of Wonder Woman trying to redeem someone, whereas Superman trying to redeem someone but not really getting what you need to do that. Having that eventually work for something as big and cosmic and daunting as Brainiac kind of works really well if you're going to have any Superman villain turn up with the Legion, not only just because of the age thing, but just because the Legion's always about like the biggest possible things, the grandest possible things to the extreme. So having literally emotional, cold, hard logic finding good because of Superman is the most hardcore, dorky ass, beautiful sentiment you can. To like, it's the extreme of redemption. It's the most unredeemable thing because it has no morality to begin with.
Yeah, and that's the thing I kind of have almost a problem with Brainiac 5, oddly enough, is it is like just the pure logical kind of thing with, like, let me rephrase this. Brainiac is this cold, purely logical, you know, evil being because of how removed he is. Like, it's so passionless, and that's what makes him so terrifying, right? But yet, Brainiac 5 is usually portrayed as pretty emotional, like with a lot of like emotional attachment to his love of Superman. And in particular, the Legion of Superheroes cartoon, of course, has him like very much like this kind of dorky fanboyism of Superman.
I've seen a lot of people actually reading to heavy.
That
it's yeah.
Yeah, no, I could see that too.
Yeah.
I can definitely see you know, Brainiac being in love with Superman, Brainiac 5 being in love with Superman. I could see that interpretation. But like in particular, even the Justice League show, when they did the Legion, like you know, they only get the one episode or whatever, and Supergirl just gets left in the future. When Justice League did the Legion, Brainiac falls in love with Supergirl. Like, he's always just a very whenever I see him portrayed, he's portrayed as like relatively in touch with his emotions and stuff. And I guess you could make an argument that he evolved into those, and that's what helped him become good. But I suppose the problem I have with that is I feel like there's a much more interesting take that might just be like harder to sell. But like, what if Brainiac's path to redemption involved just cold hard logic that like destroying races and planets and stuff is in fact illogical? Like, what if that was kind of at least the start, the impetus? What if Brainiac never quite developed emotions, but instead just came to a logical conclusion about how doing good is the logical thing to do?
Mm-hmm. I definitely could see that, and I think that works. I think there's a big difference when you're talking the Brainiac 5s that is interesting to kind of go part and parcel with that, because a lot of them, how they are the fifth Brainiac varies, because sometimes when Brainiac is just an alien, he's just a member of his bloodline, and he's his family, like he's a family relative who takes on the name Brainiac in terms of like, I'm going to atone for this, and the species are inherently leaning towards being cold and illogical, but then by no means all like Brainiac. I think that's the less interesting take. I do prefer the idea that's in the DCAU and what is given in the Legion of Superheroes show, where Brainiac is an AI, and Brainiac 5 is just a natural physical evolution of the one of the fifth line, the fifth generation Brainiac, if you will. And as you can maybe make that argument, is what leads to Brainiac's 5 creation is like the logical reasoning of, well, maybe this isn't the way forward. How I always imagined it would be something equivalent to like Brainiac the first is the one we all know and see. Brainiac second maybe has come the closest to realizing that his battle with Superman is ineffectual, so he just stops dealing with that and moves on to something else. You get to the third one, and now he's decided to maybe question his initial plan and has redone the idea of, well, maybe this is illogical, like basically what you described. Because I think that's the end point, and I think the fourth one just starts to feel like, okay, why is this illogical? That even then that one discovers, well, even then the meaning of life is illogical, but that also means the ending of life is illogical, and he kind of has like that paradoxical thing, leading to the fifth one, who is specifically created to be a child, because Brainiac decides he wants to learn what it feels like to feel, and to specifically creates the logic, the solution to my problem has to be in the experience living beings have called emotion. So I will program myself to have the closest to that I can. And Brainiac 5 gets there, but part of his arc in that show is he's not really there still. It's still made of AI, and he has to kind of grapple with that. And I think that's so interesting, that like progression of like almost trying to work out a problem through hundreds of thousands of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just an interesting notion, and maybe that's a good way to like marry the two, is you just have it be where it's like, you know, this logical battle, and then the realization becomes in accepting and in utilizing emotions. I think that's probably a good argument to make. What do you think of the like role that Brainiac 5 serves as a member of the Legion of Superheroes? As, you know, being kind of because we don't have a lot of characters like this where being smart is really the only card they have. Like he's kind of strong and stuff, but mainly, at least in DC, there's very few purely intellectual heroes.
He's very close to what Reed Richards plays on the Fantastic Four.
Mm-hmm.
Reed can fight in very much the same way. He's not like just a glass cannon, but he's by far the physically weakest on that team, and that's not his strong suit. His strong suit is just figuring out the problem. I see Brainiac 5 in very much the same way I see Reed, in that he is caring and he is emotional, but at the same time he's the one person on a team of teenagers or young adults or just a family, in Reed's case, where he can make the adult or mature thing to like step back and analyze the situation, because it's like it's basically like a switch for him. Mm-hmm. he's I'm caught in a group of hormonal teenagers. It's the guy who doesn't have hormones who should be making the strategic choices. I think that's like, I don't know if that's intentional, but then again, a lot of Silver Age Superman choices have like some very toned kind of comment. Like it says a lot that most of the Legion superhero comics I have read from that time period are all about who wants to fuck each other, and a lot of it is the guys most of the time. So like there's a lot of subtext going on there for like just horny teenage relationships, and Clark Kent trying to work them out. So Brainiac being in that position on the team, I think works really well, and I think it's something I would actually like to see more, especially in terms of people maybe being too aware. Just looks like the hot take you see every Twitter of just like, oh, the superheroes just exist to beat up poor people. I think characters like that who just outthink situations are like a very good way forward if you want to like really combat that criticism of the genre.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make. And, you know, it's funny, I'm just, as I was sitting there making that point, like, there really aren't a lot of those in DC. We've got Mr. Terrific comes to mind. But, like, for all the super geniuses in DC, they usually have something else going for them. Whereas Brainiac 5 is just the brain, you know? Like, he invents tech all Tony Stark-like and shit, but it's all just an extension of his intellect. Which is, I don't know, it's a cool idea to play with, especially in the DC universe on that side of things. So as Brainiac 5 exists on the Legion of Superheroes, and as he deals with you know, the threats the Legion comes up with, which are just bizarre sometimes, what do you think of the idea that having a character like that who's got this kind of villainous history to him, what do you think of his role dealing with that kind of in his background, in his history, in such a peaceful future?
I think it's a very, very interesting thing, simply to do with any character, really, but particularly with someone as Brainiac, who not only is like, okay, if you were the descendant of the Joker and Harley Quinn, that'd be pretty shitty for any person, because they're all, especially in DC, that body count is insane. Mm-hmm. You're always gonna get kind of looked on for that, no matter what your things are, especially if it like if everyone else in your family follows suit except you, like is in the case with Rare 5. But the Joker is fucking small potatoes on the scale of what Brainiac has done to the universe. Brainiac has done, like, you could argue, you really could make a strong argument that Brainiac has done more damage long-term to the DC universe than even Darkseid, because Darkseid doesn't tend to win as much as Brainiac does. Mm-hmm. Brainiac has a fucking endless collection of victories that just never get brought back. Of just worlds and civilizations that are just gone for good. Like, even when Snyder decided to bring a couple of them back in Justice League Odyssey, the thing that happened, No Justice, I think it was called, yeah, brought a lot of them back, but even then they make a point, like I think it's Sinestro who says, yeah, this is just like 5. We can't get them all back, this is just a lost cause. So that is insane. That is unimaginable levels of death and pain and culture and knowledge of things that are just taken forever. And not only are you blood, you literally are that person just resetted 4 more times. of course they're going to be dealing with every single thing of that. Every single action they make can be turned against them, especially when they play that chess master archetype, who Brainiac was all about, doing the move you don't see far ahead. There's so much interesting ground there, specifically because it is Brainiac, and almost, I think it's like having a character trying to deal with like the Terminator AI prophecy as themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, am I doomed to repeat that mistake? And I think even that applies to the comic version, when it's not as direct. It's still, you're taking up the name Brainiac of the worst being in all of history. How do you reconcile that? How do you redeem it? And I think it says a lot about DC, because this is Marvel. I don't think it would go this way, but Brainiac 5 does redeem it, and he does become, when we first meet him, he's basically 100% accepted. A lot of stuff must have happened off screen before we ever see the Legion to see how he's relatively in a good place. It's just when things start getting crazier, more doubts start to pop up, but the team doesn't really doubt him initially. And like the people at large don't seem to doubt him initially. So it paints a very interesting future of the DC universe where things are that good.
Yeah, I agree with that. What's interesting then is, of course, that Brainiac 5's like greatest threat kind of story seems to revolve around the idea that, oh, he's gonna eventually just revert back and become Brainiac all over again. Which is interesting because it adds that element of tragedy to the character, but I wonder if that's like, if it's the option of like going too easy, you know, if it's just Brainiac 5 reverting back to Brainiac 1 is just, what if Superman were evil all over again? Do you think that's like on that same level, or do you think there is something more to that kind of story with the character?
I think any redemption story for like a legacy has to be about the backslide a little bit, I feel. Because it makes you're not ignoring the problem. You're not pretending that there's nothing there to be dealt with and just moving on. You're specifically trying to prove why this won't be an issue ever again, because you deal with the backslide. It becomes a problem when it's like constant, mm-hmm. Which is the Superman thing. Is that evil Superman isn't it's a gold idea. People have mined gold out of that. Irredeemable by Mark Waid is the best evil Superman story you'll ever read. Tom Taylor managed to make Injustice Superman's fall really heartbreaking and tragic. The concept itself isn't flawed. It's every fucking other issue at this point. And I'm just sick and tired of seeing that. I don't think other characters have had it to that extent, so I think it's fine.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a fair one. It's just one of those questions of like, what's the other example of this? I think Superman's actually got a lot of characters with this kind of thing going for him in his rogues gallery, which is kind of unfortunate. It's like the Zod problem for Superman. There seems to really only be one story to tell with Zod, and that's his introduction to, Earth, right? After that, you run out of steam really quick, or at least there doesn't seem to be much creative ideas after that of what to do with Zod post, his first encounter with Superman. Occasionally things will do some interesting stuff. I kind of like what Krypton was up to. That show got canceled, right? It's not getting a season 3. Yeah. I'll have to see season 2 and see if that remains. But like that does some interesting stuff with Zod. But I worry if like Brainiac 5 has that same problem. It's like, okay, so we're gonna deal with, he's working through these emotions, and he's working, trying to live up to his idol Superman, and then he has to, and then he gets taken over by his former self, kind of thing. I worry that that's like the only story the character has, and if that's the case, that's a big problem for any kind of longevity.
I think you'd be onto something more if he was created as a standalone character in the same way that Zod is. Zod has that issue because even though he has teammates, they're like minions, and a lot of people just default to retelling Superman 2 over and over again. Whereas Brainiac 5 has a really solid core concept and a kind of like summarize him in a sentence, which makes him gold to put on a team. Because you can tell that story and you can make it like a renowned thing forever, but at the same time, even though his own individual focused arc is kind of, that's the one that's most apparent, as a team dynamic, even if he just takes like a backseat supporting role after that arc, he kind of still works in the same way that, say, like Tim Drake works for me in like Detective Comics. Is Tim Drake kind of already has his big moment in his first storyline, in Place of Dying, and after that point, he still kind of remains Tim Drake for a bit here and there. Brainiac 5 feels like that to me, where they don't have to be the one driving the narrative. They're just a really interesting character to have around to comment about shit, to interact with people and give their opinion, because especially Brainiac 5, just Brainiac, if good, is still a really good concept for continual stories that I don't think has the problem of like Zod runs into, which is just Superman as an evil dictator. Which is just like, yeah, okay, we've seen it. Whereas Zod has an initial thing that if people dive deeper, and I think this is for a lot of characters, like James Tynion, the current writer for Batman now, was talking about how he feels the same way about like Two-Face or Mr. Freeze. And he kind of went into is like, that thing is a problem if you look at it the way that character always has been looked at. But if you go a little deeper sometimes, there are more stories to be told. Like the Zod, for instance, has a whole thing, well, he used to be Jor-El's friend. That implies he must be a more interesting character than we're seeing. Let's get into that shit. How can we make him nuanced? Brainiac 5, I think, is the same, where, yes, he deals with that initial arc, but the character he comes out after that, I think, is just, here's the bottler of worlds dedicated now to saving worlds. Go.
And I think there could maybe be some interesting stuff you could do with Brainiac, or with Brainiac 5, where like doing the more Brainiac-y thing is the only way to save the day. So like, I don't know, you could maybe do an interesting story where like a world is about to die and he keeps trying all these things to save it, but like the situation keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And so his go-to option is, and he just like miniaturizes the entire like the one city on the planet because it's all he can do to save it, and everyone's just like freaking out because it's the most Brainiac move you could have made. That could be maybe an interesting place for a story with the character. I don't know. It's just it's one of those things I think about where I think that some characters introduced in comics have like a really cool gimmick, but some of those gimmicks have more legs than others. Like the Joker's just, he's evil, he's crazy, and he's also hilarious. Go. Like that's really all. If you can remember those three things, I feel like you can write a really good Joker story over and over and over again, and they're all going to be different. But some characters, like, they have a gimmick or they have a cool background, but unfortunately it doesn't lend itself well to long-term, repeated, serialized storytelling, you know? And I think even if Brainiac 5 might have more going for him past the one story, depending on how creative you get, I don't think it's as universally easy a concept to play with as someone like the Joker.
But then at the same time, like, the Joker is one of the greatest ideas for a fictional villain you could ever have. Because he's diametrically opposed to Batman, who's one of the greatest ideas you can have for a protagonist, who's built upon decades and centuries of humanity's myth. The same with Superman and Lex Luthor as well. It's like, you compare it against Gold here. Like, it's a miracle superhero comics have found ways to keep certain characters interesting for just the amount of monthly to weekly storytelling they're given, that I feel like the Legion of Superheroes taking as many breaks as they do in between popularity does speak to your point that they may not be the best for such long runs. But I don't necessarily see that as inherent negative for any fictional character, because at what scale are you comparing them to be fictional characters, and at what scale are you comparing them to how well they can sustain marketing for decades?
Nah, that's fair. That's totally fair. All right. So recommendations for Brainiac 5, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and recommend the Legion of Superheroes cartoon. I think they did a really good job, particularly in season 2, with just doing the Brainiac 5 story. I don't know if I really have much else to recommend. His episode of Justice League Unlimited it's alright. He's barely in Justice League versus the Fatal Five, so don't really have anything to recommend there. He's in Supergirl. I like his characterization in that. The actor's having a ton of fun playing him.
Mm-hmm. He's very... I think it's a very good live-action adaptation of that concept.
Yeah. You got anything else you can think of with Brainiac 5?
Yeah, just comic-wise, I'll say go check out some of the original Silver Age issues, just because they can actually be a ton of fun. And some of them, especially if you can get like the Kurt Swan drawn ones, they tend to have like much better. I think I remember the artist's name more than the writers sometimes, but for those early issues. But a lot of them are quite fun, especially like Superboy joins the Legion of Superheroes is actually pretty fun. And if you got like the DC Universe app, you can check them all out on there. And then also Jeff Johns' Legion of Superheroes arc is a very good showing for them, and you can go check out the current Bendis run. I'm hearing good things about it. I haven't had a chance to check it out myself yet, but why not jump on? It's only like 2 issues in. Give it a shot if you like it.
Cool. All right, Alfie, who are we going to talk about next time?
This one, I'm curious about what you'll think, because I don't want to possibly be robbing you of future episodes, but at the same time, I think maybe this would be a stronger product just to do it all at once. I kind of want to talk about just Doctor Who companions.
Oh
I don't
my!
I don't know if one can hold it on their own. If you can think of one...
You don't think we can do a whole episode on fucking Clara Oswald? Because I don't either, because she's not that interesting of a fucking character, no matter how much Moffat tried to shove her down my goddamn throat. No, that's fine. Because, yeah, we could always go back if we wanted to. It's fine. No, I'm down for that.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good, then. Because I just wanted to... I was thinking, I'm in a Doctor Who-y mood. I want to do a companion. I was just like, that's just 5 minutes and we covered like one. I was just like, this is gonna last. But maybe if we go into the concept itself, we can get some juicy details.
No, that's totally doable. All right. So join us next time for that, folks. Until then, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am the champion of the oppressed.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.